Electrocast.
Why wait to see if you'll get something you like this Valentine's Day when you can go to BlueNile.com and find something you'll love? Whether you're looking to treat yourself to a little winter sparkle or show a galentine how much you appreciate them, Blue Nile offers a wide selection of high-quality designs, expert guidance, and free 30-day returns for the ultimate peace of mind. You can even design your own jewelry. Right now, save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
On this episode of Missing the Point, we're joined by former general manager of the Boston Celtics from 1984 to 1997, Jan Volk. Jan talks to us about how he first started working in the Boston Celtics front office with Red Auerbach and how he was hand-chosen by Red to be his successor as general manager. Jan will also tell us some of his favorite stories from the front office, from learning what the salary cap was, to some of his favorite draft time moves, from training for Bill Walton in 1985 to the drafting of Len Bias in 86. This is Missing the Point, episode 50. But it's all relative.
Welcome into Missing the Point. My name is Joe Malkin, and tonight we have a great guest joining us. Alongside me is Rayshawn, Buchanan, and Dave Clarke. As always, our EP, Craig D'Alessandro. And with us, we have Jan Volk. Some of you may know the name, but after this interview, you'll all know it. Jan Volk, who grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, born in Davenport, Iowa, is a graduate of Columbia Law School and began working with the Boston Celtics shortly after graduating in 1971. Early on, he worked as a ticket sales director, manager of equipment purchases, which is not an easy job, traveling secretary, which is not an easy job, business manager, and general counsel for the team. In 1976, he was promoted to vice president. In 1980, he was named assistant general manager to the general manager, who was Red Auerbach. Not an easy job, Jan. Following the 1984 NBA draft, Red Auerbach retired as Celtics general manager, and on July 11th, 1984, Jan Volk was named general manager of the best franchise in basketball history. As the Celtics general manager, Volk was a part of 3 NBA championships and saw the team win a total of 5 in his entire tenure with the franchise. Jan left the team in 1997 and 3 years later started his own photography business, Sports Pics Photography. And for the last 21 years, 22 as we discussed, Jan, he has been shooting photography for high schools, colleges, and the Cape Cod Baseball League and many other organizations. Jan Volk, welcome into Missing the Point.
Good to be here.
Glad you could make it. So,
do you have that intro in writing?
I mean, you want me to send it to you?
Might use it again.
We're gonna have to. I mean, I talked to you enough. We're gonna have to do that, huh? So, Jan, we want to start at the beginning. So, you graduated Columbia Law, and all of a sudden, you were working for the Boston Celtics. How did that come about?
Well, let me step back a little bit. When I was in college, I went to Colby. And I took a course that turned out for me to be very, very important. It was not a typical liberal arts program. It was business law. I took a course in business law, and I was fascinated by what I was reading and learning, and eventually got a job working as an intern for a local law firm. And I worked hard, and I decided, you know what, this is what I want to do. And so I applied. I got into Columbia. Halfway through my tenure there, let's say a year and a half into the program, I started to think a little differently about what I wanted to do. And I wasn't sure that this is what I wanted to do. And I knew that getting my degree was important, that passing the bar was important. But then I was going to maybe decide, maybe I was going to do something else or try something else. And that's exactly what I did. And I ended up working for the Boston Celtics. And that was a progression. It was nonstop. It was 18, 19 hours a day. And it was a great experience for somebody who had no experience, which was me. I became an expert in the field because I knew a little bit. You didn't need to know all that much. But eventually, Red started to give me more and more things to do. The most significant turning point, maybe one of the key epiphanies in my life, occurred the first year I was there working for the Celtics in January of that year, January 1971. Red was sitting in a box. He would sit at the Garden, and we were playing a team. I don't know who the other team was. I know it was not the Phoenix Suns, but I also know that Red's guest in his box was Jerry Colangelo, who at the time was the general manager of the Suns. And I got summoned in the middle of the first period. I got summoned by Red to the locker room. Now, I'd been working there maybe 5 months, not much more. I had certainly been in and out of the locker room a bunch of times every game, but I had never been summoned to the locker room. And I was never in the locker room before with Red Auerbach, all by ourselves. And he looks at me and he said, "You're a lawyer, right?" I said, "Well, sort of. What do you need?" Well, it turned out he had made a deal with Jerry Colangelo that involved a lot of contingencies, and he needed a lawyer. And the team's lawyer this was a Sunday afternoon. The team's lawyer was somewhere skiing. And in 1972, if you were skiing, you might as well be on the moon. Couldn't reach him, couldn't reach the associates, any of the associates. And Red was stuck with me. He gave me a list of the term sheet of what they had agreed to. And as I said, it had contingencies. It was not all going to be determined that day. So we had to have something that was going to have a life to it. As it turns out, what we did, you couldn't do now. The league rules wouldn't allow you to do it. But they did then. I left the locker room, went back to the office, found one of my friends from law school who had 5 months experience as compared to my 0, and we cobbled together a contract. And ultimately, Jerry Colangelo signed it, and ultimately it was executed upon. And what it was the trading of the draft rights to Charlie Scott to Phoenix for Paul Silas. And that was a turning point for a number of things. That was a turning point for the team, and clearly a turning point for me, because Red was a smart guy. He used his personnel very effectively, and he looked and saw, wow, this is a guy, he's here every day. He did a pretty good job with this contract. And you know what? I'm already paying him. Sounds like a good idea. So that's how my career kind of got jump-started.
Because there was a period where Red did everything, right? Like, before you got there, famously, he was scouting other teams, scouting college players, like doing absolutely everything on the list. So he, to feel handpicked by him, you must have felt, oh, wow, this is a job he probably has a way to do it already, himself. So I better get it right. Or is it just in context, in retrospect, being like, oh, that was a big moment?
Well, let me tell you something about Red that people don't readily recognize. For a guy who had the success that he had, and for a guy who had the ego that he needed to have, it was a surprise. It's a surprise to people to realize that he had holes in his game that he knew about. He knew he wasn't particularly good at this or that or something else. And he hired people to fill those roles. And that was a great opportunity for me, because he hired me in that context. And ultimately, my career evolved as the business was evolving. There's no better way to learn than to be a participant in something like running a team franchise when nobody else really knows how to do it either.
Yeah, you're kind of building the plane while you're flying it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe not quite that, but nobody else got hurt, but there were mistakes made. We made mistakes, and for the most part, we did pretty well with it. The interesting thing about this, when Red decided to retire, he announced it at the B'nai B'rith dinner, which was a charitable event that was held each year prior to the first game at a nice venue, and lots of people, maybe 2,000 people. And he would always speak. And he was speaking. This would have been in October, maybe, of 83, give or take. I think that's when it was. And he got up and announced, unbeknownst to any of us, that he was going to retire at the end of the year. And then he did something that just blew my socks off. In front of these 2,000 people, and he said, and I'm recommending that Jan Volk take my place.
Oh, wow. You didn't even know that you were lined up.
Never discuss that with me.
Wow. What was your reaction at the time?
Red got what he wanted most of the time. And, happens that this worked out well for me too.
When you were going to his office, when you got summoned to his office that day, did you know? It sounds like you knew at the time, oh, this is a big deal, I better not screw this up. Or is it just like looking back, you're like, oh, that was a big moment?
I'm much more so looking back than in the moment itself. Yes, it caught my attention. I mean, it was something I'd never done before. As I said, I'd never been summoned to the locker room. I'd never been in the locker room with just Red. That was notable, but I didn't understand the significance that it had because, of course, it led to so many other things.
Yeah, it led to so many things because from 1971 to 1979, 1980, you held a number of positions and very, very good. I mean, now you look at sports and you know who the traveling secretaries are. You know who some of these people are. And then in 1980, he named, obviously a few years later, he names you or suggests you as his successor. But in 1980, he basically sits you right next to him, and that started really in that moment started one of the best runs in the franchise's history in the 1980s.
Well, that had a lot to do with the players, much more to do with anything else. It was an interesting place to work. It was a great place to work. People who began to work at the Celtics had to understand, and most of them did, or they didn't stay very long. They had to understand that no matter what they did or how successful they were, Red was going to get the credit. In the end, that's what was going to happen. And if you could live with that, you found yourself into a really, really mom and pop welcoming organization where everybody helped everybody else. There was in that type of environment, when you know Red's going to get the credit, you're really the only opportunity for you to get that kind of credit was collectively as part of a group. You find people work together very, very effectively without worried about who's going to get the credit and who had to worry about what. And it was a nice place to be.
It's funny you say that because I heard the credit for this may or may not be true. I have to hear from the horse's mouth, but I hear the credit for the way Larry Bird was drafted should go to you, though, right? Wasn't that your side of the argument that you could get away with drafting him as a junior, waiting a year, and then getting him in, or did I hear wrong?
Oh, you got it sort of right. I mean, I knew the rules. As I said, Red knew he had holes in his game, and he hired people to fill those holes. That was one of the holes it was getting more and more complex. It's extraordinarily complex now.
Right.
But the advent of the salary cap, which came after we had drafted Larry, but the advent of the salary cap really was a significant event for me because we were capped and we had to learn it really quite quickly. Red relied on us and relied on me to know that. And the same is true, as you point out, the issue with the draft, whether we could draft him or not. It wasn't that there wasn't a rule there. It had been modified. And Red didn't know that. And yes, he trusted me, but no, he didn't. And what happened is Tom Sanders popped in. Tom Sanders Hatch for a period of time was the head coach for half a season or so. He saw the two of us, two very stubborn people, trying to convince the other that they were right. And Satch had the perfect solutions. And call the league. They'll tell you. And we did. And David Stern happened to be the general counsel at the time. He was not yet commissioner. And he verified it. So, but we were also in the right spot for that because Larry had told the world he was not coming out. He was going to go back for his senior year. And the old rule was that once he went back to school, an early entry draftee like that, the team lost their exclusive rights to him and he went back into the pool. In reality, what ultimately happened is you had the exclusive rights until the day before the next draft, which is how we drafted him.
I guess he was worth the wait. Okay, it worked out.
Red would tell you, he'd be the first to tell you he was better than I thought he was. I thought he was going to be really good, is what he would say. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know he was going to be this good.
Yeah.
He was
How do you know?
One of the best in franchise history, right? So
any franchise history.
You're absolutely right.
I think I still want to stick with the 70s. Cause I know we kind of touched around different things that happened in the 70s, and you mentioned the Charlie Scott trade, for Paul Silas, who was one of the better bench players that we've had here in Boston. We came on to become a great coach later on in the NBA as well. But obviously, there was two championships in the 70s. They won in 74 and 76 under Tom Heinsohn's tutelage. So, what would you say was the better team out of those two? And, do you think Tommy Heinsohn should have stayed longer as the coach there? Because I know he was only there for about 4 or 5 seasons.
Well, I've had questions like that, but never would be comparing 74 and 76. A lot of similarity. When you've got your center's Dave Cowens. I mean, you've automatically got a huge step towards that. Boy, I tell you, I don't think I can choose there. I think that was an extraordinary team. They were small. They ran the break. They were very active, and they played hard with talent. So I'm going to beg off that. As far as Tommy is concerned, Tommy would be the first to tell you that in the end, coaches are hired to be fired. And it takes a while. It takes a while to burn out, but most of them do in one way or another. And it's usually a consequence of having been with the same players over a protracted period of time, where there's a lot of the cajoling that goes on. In Tommy's case, I think the players got tired of his interaction with the referees, but in the end, he was very supportive of his players, very much so. I think they appreciated it much more so after he had left. I know that, for example, JoJo, who got traded, ultimately came back, and he saw how special it was playing for Tommy, and he missed it.
Yeah, no, that's totally understandable. Because I think I remember looking back just through. Wasn't around, but just looking through different games. You can speak more to this, but I feel like possibly the best team maybe didn't even win. And I think that was like the 72-73 team that went 68-14, but lost to the Knicks in the conference finals. So, do you think there's any truth to that? Or I feel like that's another team that could have won another championship. I feel like to win 68 games and not win, it's like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Correct me now, because you've been looking and I haven't been. Was that the series where John Havlicek dislocated his shoulder or separated his shoulder?
It might have been. I can't remember off the top of my head. I just know they lost.
And he had to shoot with his other hand. That was that series.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was, your best player is out. He missed, I don't remember how many games he missed, but maybe it was 4 in the final, and not in the final, the conference finals. And we ended up going to 7 games, and that's the first game that he came back. And he struggled. He was hurt. He was hurt. He tried, but he couldn't play.
And what year was it that Havlicek had it written into his contract that he wouldn't practice on a certain floor down near the Cape?
You really want me to say?
Well, you and I have talked about it before. I told these guys, and they were like, "What is that floor made of?" And I told them, and they kind of understood. So,
one part would be cement. One part of the equation would be that it's made out of cement, but
yeah.
No, John figured it out pretty quickly, because what he did, that was for training camp. That was at Mass Maritime. I said it. Okay.
It was a long time ago. It's fine.
But John, the next year, was a free agent. He wasn't going anywhere. But he waited to sign his contract until we were done with double sessions and we were back home. We weren't playing on that floor. It was a tough floor to play on.
Yeah, well, I can tell you it's still a tough floor to play on. But, I mean, I'm not as good of a basketball player as John Havlicek. I mean, contrary to popular belief, but I'm not as good as John Havlicek. So
it worked out for him. He got all that longevity out of it. You know what I mean? Not a lot of guys playing multiple eras, like 15 seasons. He took body, it worked out. I'm curious, Jan, you guys draft Larry Bird. You have these great 70s teams. You draft Larry Bird. Things are looking up. Everybody knows like the much publicized then kind of falling out between Red and the new owner when they did that weird franchise switch. Brown, I think was his name. I'm just curious to know your perspective on that, because the way you seem to talk about Red, it seems like you were probably pretty confident he was going to come out on top in that battle of wills, even though he wasn't, the owner of the club. I'm just curious your perspective of it, how it when it all went down, like the team, Larry Bird, young star, couple of losing seasons, but like overall, they're still the Boston Celtics. He's still Red Auerbach. Like, where were you in all this?
I have to think this out here as to what year that was.
It was 79, I think, or 78.
I'm not sure Larry was playing yet.
I think you had drafted him, but then you had to wait a year, and then it was that year that the swap happened.
Yeah, I think it was before he ever laced him up for the Celtics. So, but Red was pushed to the brink,
Mm-hmm.
And he said he had, I wasn't there, he had a ride with a cab driver to the airport who convinced him he should stay. That's what Red said. I have no contrary evidence that he didn't. I also don't know for sure that he ever did.
Someone should find that cab driver and give him a medal or the key to the city or something.
Yeah,
but where were you in all this in the tension? Did you think, were you pretty convinced he was going to leave at one point? Because you were Red's guy, right? So
it's hard to put myself back in that spot. I was worried, but I wasn't really concerned about my job. I was concerned about what was happening to the Celtics. We all really found ourselves the keepers of a public trust. What we were doing is we were trying to make the most out of what was despite who actually owned it. They were all owners. All of our fans had vested interest. They all had emotional ties as though they owned it. So there was a lot of, it's not pressure, but there was a lot of responsibility in that context to get it right.
Yeah, we talk so much on this show about the kind of strange difference between the Celtics fan base and the Patriots fan base and the Red Sox fan base, and how the Celtics are kind of unique and singular in a way that, the Boston Celtics, for better or for worse, they get a lot more slack about certain things than, like, say, the Patriots would, but then they're also like more harshly criticized in other areas. Like, it's a kind of a singular and unique fan base. Did you experience that when you were working with them, or is it more like you can take Boston sports fans as the sum of their parts?
Well, I don't have fans in any respect, but I thought the fans were terrific for us, but we were also successful. So I don't think I did quite the elaborate analysis that maybe somebody else did, or maybe that you were doing. We had season ticket holders. We had waiting lists to get tickets. We experienced something that none of those other franchises did, nor did any others, with the possible exception of the Green Bay Packers, and only in name only. And that is that we were a publicly held company for a long time. We had a public offering in 1984. It intrigued us as to how that was going to change our lives, because now we had thousands of actual, real, honest to goodness, money invested owners. And it wasn't a problem. We recognized that the folks that had an emotional investment in the Celtics had stronger ties than those that had economic interests in the Celtics as fans. Many of them, there were some crossovers, but the fans themselves, they're special. There is a certain amount of blind faith that goes with that in any team. And it's great when you can live up to that blind faith. And look, the teams in Patriot history, the last 20 years, they're pretty darn good in terms of living up to those expectations. And the Celtics did the same.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that point there, Jen, for sure. Want to take it back to 1980 and kind of keep the theme with the blind faith, right? So I believe that's the year that McHale got swapped for Joe Barry Carroll, or they got Parrish in the deal.
Not direct swap, it was a draft choice swap.
Draft choice swap, okay.
So we got the draft pick with which Kevin McHale was drafted, but there was no certainty to it. Obviously, it was third pick. So very much like what happened with Tatum.
Yes. Okay. Got you. Okay.
Very, very similar.
Yeah. So what was the process like? Was McHale going to be the guy all along, or like, was there anybody else you guys were looking at in that year's draft? Like, and how did you guys acquire Robert Parrish? I know it was a trade with Golden State, right? Is that how we got?
Yeah, it was a trade with Golden State. We had the third pick, and I think the 14th. I'm not 100% certain, but I think that. And what we did is we traded that number. We had the number one pick. Let's step back. We had the number one pick and the 14th pick. We traded the number one pick to Cleveland Golden State for the rights to the third pick
and Robert Parrish.
And then we had the 14th pick, which I think went to Robert Parrish. I think that's how it was evened out.
That's pretty crazy to put that big three together in one, basically.
Yeah, one deal. Yeah, that's awesome. like I think about that now. Like that's got to be a top 5 deal. Like it's like, I know it's easy to say because you're on here, but I mean I would say it if you weren't on here. Like that to me, it's a steal. Obviously, you don't think it's a steal in the moment, but to get to 2/3 of the big three that essentially dominated the '80s, that went to 4 straight finals in the '80s, like it is incredible. So I mean, so kudos to you and the rest of the organization for making that happen.
In fairness, Robert was a throw-in, much more so. Robert was an underachiever at the time, and Red was always did recognize the big guys take a while to come back to reach potential, and but we were taking a chance, and we were taking a chance that I'm trying to think now. It was second pick, I think, was the Jazz. Was it the Jazz?
It was Utah. Darryl Griffith.
They took Darryl Griffith, yeah. So we had a hope that we wouldn't have taken Darryl Griffith with the third pick if that had happened, but we really wanted McHale.
Well, and you got him,
and and the Gophers were under some sort of restriction by the NCAA. They could not. I don't think they played in the March Madness, and so he was really selected based on what we saw or what our scouts saw.
There was no showcase for him then, so that might have enabled you to grab him like a little bit lower, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like I said, that ties into the blind faith, right? It's like okay, like we've seen him the year before. This guy's talented. Let's just see what he can do, and then really, I mean that 80-81 year, you guys go on to win the championship. So can you speak about just how? I think about the Philadelphia series more so than the series against the Rockets, because I know, that's the series where it got really feisty. I know Maxwell had got into the stands with the fan, and, I think that was game 6, if I'm not mistaken. So, so could you just speak to really just that series, and did you guys think you were going to get past Philly? Because I know Philly had just made the finals the year before. They were the Eastern Conference champions. So can you just speak about those battles with Philly and just how talented they were at that time?
As I recall, we were down 3-1.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And with game 5 and 7 in Boston, if we were to get to it. So we came back to Boston. I think we were in those 3 games, as I recall, we were down 2 or 4 points with 2 minutes to go in each of those games. We came from behind in each one of those games. The one that I do remember, you mentioned the Max excursion into the cheap seats, well, actually into the expensive seats in the first row, was in the midst of something else that happened. Midway through the third period, we were down double digits in the third period. And this is game 6 in Philadelphia, and the PA announcer, I'm trying to think of his name, Dave Zinkoff, I don't know if any of you remember him. Do you know any idea?
No, but I know he was very famous for how he called, especially opposing players' names. So what it was, Magic with Bird, and so yeah.
He was there, Johnny Most, only as a play-by-play announcer. Yeah. He was very partial. He was a very decent guy, and really understood. He was very professional. But he did things like Bailey Howell played for the Celtics. Was a terrific player. And whenever he would commit a foul, Dave Zinkoff would say, "And that was a Howell foul." And every time it just the crowd loved it. But he made an announcement, not on his own, marketing department, to remind fans that tickets for game 1 of the finals would be on sale right after the conclusion of tonight's game.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. And we heard that in the huddle. Guys were saying, "Did I hear that right?" And it got their attention, and we came back for a win there, and we ended up winning it at home. As I said, in each case, coming from behind.
We've used that analogy when we go back and talk about the Patriots, especially when we talk about the 2001 season, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the St. Louis Rams, basically punching their ticket to the Super Bowl before they even get there. So that's kind of the basketball equivalent. It was happening a lot earlier than 2001. So big mess up by the Philadelphia marketing department, but you'll take it.
Yeah, but it seems like they have a thing of doing that, because even recent day, a couple of years ago, when they faced Philadelphia and it was Celtics played Philly, and the confetti just fell. So I guess it's just something going on in Philadelphia. They just think that they like to call things prematurely. So
this the Red Auerbach story with things like that. And when we were out in L.A., in '69, which this is the team. This turns out to be Russell's last game. We didn't know that at the time, but he had determined it was. He hadn't shared that when they were. It was Sam Jones. Sam had declared this was his last game, and while warming up before Game 7,
they had the balloons.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember who it was, but somebody saw a memo, piece of paper on right up against the court on the floor, and picked it up, and it was a memo to the staff about what was going to happen when they won the game that night. And it was the balloons would come down from whatever, the USC marching band would come in from one side and playing Happy Days Are Here Again. I mean, to that detail.
Wow.
And apparently there were, I guess, 6,000 balloons in the ceiling. And now I remember it one way, and it may have been that it didn't happen this way. But my recollection is after we won and Red's running on the court, and he's excited much more so than normal, because this was an accomplishment. This was a team that really, really had to claw and scratch and just, get itself in a position where it had a chance to win, and they did. But the ABC announcer was Chris Schenkel, and he said something to Red like, "So Red, what do you think? You guys came from behind. You were finished fourth in the conference. What do you think about this win?" He says, "Well, I got just one question. What are they going to do with the effing balloons?" And I believe it was on live TV, and I believe it got through. I'm not sure.
That's great.
No tape delay back then.
But, right, exactly. But also I want to say that's the same press conference when because obviously, like I said, they talked to the guy Jack, and Bill Russell's up there, and you hear Red Auerbach in the background saying one more time, and it's just like it's one of the most one of the most notable quotables that you could hear from a locker room after the finals win. So yeah, appreciate you sharing that story.
Well, it was something I will never forget. It was also a pretty happy moment for all of us, everybody involved. John Havlicek made a comment to me at one point in time that I hadn't really thought about, but he said, in the context of a playoff game, he said, I know it's much harder for you to sit through this than it is for me to play through this. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, I get out there and I play. I'm nervous, but once that ball is in play for the first time, I'm not nervous anymore. I just play. Said, you don't have an outlet. You have to watch and hope I do well. I said, well, that's true.
That's a good point. It's a good point. I said he's in control of his own destiny out there with the ball. It's like your destiny's in someone else's hands once that whistle goes. So it's a good point.
Recognize that, and it's not arrogance; it's confidence.
Well, and you were with this team during a time where your hopes and dreams were in the hands of John Havlicek, Cedric Maxwell, Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale. I mean, you can't really have much better company there.
Yeah, can't do better than that. No. The Lakers are pretty good, though.
The Lakers are all right. I mean, they've done okay over the years.
When apropos of nothing, I guess, when Elgin Baylor passed away a couple of weeks ago, there was an article that ran. There were a number of articles chronicling his history and stuff. But then Bob Ryan did one, and he talked about the fifth. I think it was in the fifth game. Elgin scored 61 points in that game. Well, I remember that from a slightly different point of view, and I remember what happened in the locker room afterwards, in the Lakers locker room. Rod Hundley. Do you remember Rod Hundley? Anybody know who he is?
No, only guys I remember on my team is just Weston Baylor, honestly.
Yeah, well, he passed away maybe 2 or 3 years ago. He was a color commentator for years for the Utah Jazz.
He was a player though, right, Jan? Hot Rod Hundley? Hot Rod?
Yeah. He was a player with a great sense of humor, and that's I'm pointing out that. But when he was playing in 62, I think it was 60. No, 60. No, it's 65. I think it was 65. I stand corrected. Correct myself. Maybe I'm wrong. Both. The game was over. We had beaten them in Game 5. And he's muttering to himself. He's toweling down. He's got a horde of media around him, and he's saying, I don't know what to say. I don't know how we beat these guys. I mean, I have no idea how we beat these guys. Between Elgin and me, we had 63 points, and we still couldn't beat them.
I know, speaking of Celtics Lakers, because we can't have you on here and not talk about that. But obviously in the 60s, it was dominated by Boston, right? I mean, the first 8 times they met, they were 8-0. Jerry West was 1-8 or 1-9 in his finals appearances. But then, to the time that you become the assistant GM and then the GM, they faced each other in 84, 86, and then 87. So Larry Bird had made a quote, I forget on what documentary it was, but he mentioned that in game 7 to 84, I think when they won 111 and 102, he felt that's the only time that there was no way that LA was going to come in there and win. So I wanted to ask you, did you feel that same way? And just how much did you fear the Lakers as someone being in the front office as opposed to not being on the court?
Explain to me, let's step back. What did Larry say?
So Larry mentioned that in that game 7 when they won 111 to 102, he mentioned that was the only time that he felt that there was no way that LA was going to come in there and beat them and win that game 7. So I just wanted to ask you, just how did you feel that same way? And what was your fear as someone that was in the front office of the Lakers? Because like you said, they were a great team, but did you have that same feeling in that first finals matchup of 84?
I always had a respectful view of the opponents. If you, they're all great teams. There's things that separate them, but they're all talented. I was concerned. The Lakers were terrific. One of the things that I would say to people, they would say, you great job. You got the best job in America, and I agree readily that for me it was the best job in America. But I would have also enjoyed it a lot more if I'd known we were going to win.
Right. right.
So, yeah, I mean, Larry may have looked at it that way. I looked at that every time we faced off with him. There was a chance of losing to those, to the Sixers, to the Lakers. There were a lot of competitive teams that we won. Sometimes we lost, and that's look if you're playing the Sisters of the Poor all the time, you're not going to have very good rivalries. There has to be a competitive impetus to those types of feelings, and it's one of the things that's kind of it applies to everybody. You've got to have players that you love to hate on the other team.
Right, exactly.
And certainly the Lakers had fewer that you love to hate until Chamberlain came. There was great respect for all of them. I'm going obviously way back, but those were teams that you could definitely and should definitely respect. But you can look at a lot of the teams and you can pull out the ones that were loved.
Right. Yeah, for sure. But also too, another thing that kind of came to my head as you were talking, because you were saying about, all the teams were great and, having a rivalry meant everything. But, can you speak about how to the point that maybe the Eastern Conference was more dominant than the West at that time? Because right now, everyone talks about current day, talks about how the West is just so much better than the East. But can you speak about how dominant the East was at that time? So Atlanta, Detroit, Milwaukee, who was a team that hasn't got brought up yet, that team with Marcus Johnson and Jack Sigma and, Sidney Moncrief, who was picked behind Magic. You just speak about how dominant the Eastern Conference was as opposed to the West at that time? Or do you agree with that?
The only dominance that I really would pay much attention to is our own.
Okay.
And and we were respectful for all. What you do is you don't play against the Western Conference teams multiple times, and it's harder to get the players that you love to hate identified in that short period of time. So I was just worried about ourselves.
So Jan, when you're at that the start of the 83 season, Red stands up. He announces his retirement at the end of the 83-84 season. He recommends you as his replacement. On July 11th, you're named the general manager of the Boston Celtics in 1984. And in October, you go and make a trade. It was one of your first big moves as Celtics GM, as you trade Gerald Henderson to the Supersonics, the team that we all wish would come back in the NBA, for an 86 first rounder. So you made the trade, but had to wait 2 years to use it. But you used it well on Len Bias.
Yeah, and obviously we didn't have a crystal ball. We couldn't tell who was going to be where. But we had identified that as a good draft for us, potentially. I'll set the record straight here on what happened, at least with respect to Gerald. We had Gerald had a very good year in '84. He was a starting guard on the Celtics team that beat the Lakers in 7. But he was a free agent that summer, and he didn't come to camp. And while we were still negotiating, but while he was not at camp, Danny Ainge moved into the starting lineup, or at least was filling the role. And it was pretty obvious that he played better as a starter, Danny, than he did coming off the bench. And it really looked like Gerald could do both. So that was under that undercurrent, Gerald felt he should come back into camp, and it was a good move to do so. We worked out a contract that was slightly different than what he had been looking at before, that he had turned down, but not appreciable. I don't know. I think we did this on a Thursday, and he played Friday and Saturday in Texas. We were in a Texas exhibition season swing, and he came back on Sunday. On Monday, I got a call from a team in the Eastern Conference, not a team not to be named. That the general manager, he and I knew each other well, and he wanted to know what did we sign Gerald for. And it's public knowledge. He just didn't, rather than calling the league, he was calling me. So I told him. And he said, good contract. I'll tell you what, I see the way Danny's playing out of that starting position. I'll tell you what, if you're interested in moving Gerald, we'd give you a first round pick for him. Unsolicited, came out of nowhere. I immediately called Red, got a conference call going with KC, Jimmy Rogers, Red, and myself. And we decided it was worth pursuing outside of conference. And we did a quick take on what teams were likely to have, over the next year or two, likely to have less than stellar seasons and would have decent draft picks. Now, this was the second, I think this was only the second year that the lottery was in place. I think it was the second year.
Yeah, it was.
It started in '85.
Yeah.
Patrick Ewing went first for that year.
That's right.
Yeah. So we're looking at a trade with two clubs. We identified two clubs, and one was. I'll only give you the one that you know. I'm not going with the other. One, I talked to two clubs, and they both were interested for a first round pick. Seattle, one of them came back to me and said, "We'll give you a second round pick in '86," and this was now the fall of '84. We'll give you, but we want lottery protection. This was new. The whole thing was new. This was the first time I had heard the phrase lottery protection. Immediately understood what they were talking about, but had not factored that in. So I listened to them, and then I got the call back from Seattle, and they were giving me an '87 pick, but no mention of lottery protection. So I had a decision to make, and the decision I made was to try to push Seattle to '86 without having raised the issue of lottery protection.
Nobody tell Seattle about lottery protection. Nobody tell them that exists.
So the general managers, and I'm not going to mention his name either. We got on the phone, we talked about it. I said, well, I need an '86 pick. He said, we're not going to give an '86 pick. I said, well, I have an offer for an '86 pick. Technically true. Which is true. I do have it. And maybe we decide to take that because we think the lottery protection is only 7, maybe not a big deal. Who knows? I said, well, we're not interested in that. I said, well, did you talk to the owner? Barry Ackerley owned the team. He said, did you talk to him? He said, no, I didn't. I don't want to give that pick. I said, well, do us both a favor, and then we can talk about it. Talk to Barry about it, because I know if you lose this pick to this other club that's giving an '86 pick, Barry's going to know why'd you lose out on the pick. And when you say, well, I didn't want to give up an '86 pick, and he hasn't acted on it, he's going to be really ticked off. He said, that's a good point. All right. So we hang up, and now I am having serious regrets. Did I overplay my hand? And 5 minutes later, I got a call back from Seattle, and he led with this. He's a good kid, isn't he? we got, and that was the start of that. So that's how we got that pick in that spot. As far as Len Bias, we had seen him at camp a couple of years. We knew who he was. The scouting report we had was Michael Jordan, 3 inches taller, better outside shot.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question I was going to ask you. I've been, excited to ask you this whole time. Is, there's across all bars in Boston right now, the ones that are open, whatever, people are still having the discussion. How good was Len Bias going to be? It's a completely codified discussion anywhere you go in the city of Boston. People want to, people are positing theories about this. And I'm just curious, is that what you think? Is it Michael Jordan 3 inches taller? Is that who he was going to be?
Well, that's got to understand Michael Jordan hadn't become Michael Jordan yet either.
Right.
So, and he was certainly well regarded. He is who we wanted. If we had the number 1 pick, and we did not, we had the number 2 pick. If we had the number 1 pick, we would have taken him as well. So that we thought a lot of him. We had seen him at Reds camp we had also seen Reggie Lewis in the same context. They played against each other. And we liked what we saw. And interesting, just a postscript to Gerald's, to trading Gerald. When Seattle came in that year to play against us, it was kind of important for us to beat them to solidify our draft pick. Yeah. But they came in and they beat us. I mean, they thumped us. I don't know. We may have been the only loss we had all year at home.
Did Gerald play? Did he have a chip on his shoulder?
Oh, yes, major league. but it was good. It was right. The game was winding down. Only seconds left. He's got the ball. He's pounding the ball at midcourt, right on the logo. Buzzer goes off. He takes the ball as hard as he possibly can and slams it down to the logo's face.
Wow.
The court. Ball goes way up in the air. And afterwards, I got asked about that. Did you see what Gerald did? And I said, yeah, I did. What'd you think? I said, I can't. Nobody wants to be traded from the Celtics. I understand that.
That's a good answer.
Right. Yeah. No.
I'd be mad too.
Right.
I understand that. That's good. That's fine. And I haven't talked to Gerald since, so I don't know any more than that.
Yeah. I mean, no, maybe he's still holding the grudge on the low, but no, that you just answered it. But that's good to know that I think Len Bias was still going to be the pick. Because I know Brad Doherty, went 1. I think Gerald Wilkins was also in that draft. That's Dominique Wilkins' cousin. So obviously, we saw the success that Dominique had. So
I think they're actually weren't they brothers?
Although they were cousins, but maybe they are brothers. Yeah.
I think the Knicks picked him with one of the picks that we had paid them for a free agent or some because we wouldn't be. I think that's where it came from.
Right, and it's funny because I think about you saying about that Seattle giving the 87 pick. It's funny because they had the 5th pick in 87, and I mean I don't know if you guys would have picked him, but Scottie Pippen was there. Some guy named Scottie Pippen was picked at 5th. So I mean, that would have been interesting to see how.
You remember where he went? Because I don't.
What school or what? Oh no, he got picked fifth overall, and then he got traded for Purvis Ellison, who was also another guy. I think Purvis Ellison was the number 1 pick that year, I believe.
He was.
Yeah. So he got switched for him. So I mean that could have been your pick. That could have been your pick as well if they chose to give me that pick. But I don't know if you guys would have picked Pippen or not.
Well, he was definitely on our radar. We were initially. Forty Anderson was one of our scouts. Had seen him maybe in his sophomore year. And he was really running below the radar at that point in time. And so we had a beat on him, but there was too much time that passed, and then he got known quickly. But
so Dan, that's a question that I have. You mentioned you had really started looking at the 86 draft in 84. You had your eyes on Len Bias. You started scouting Scottie Pippen, or at least had seen him in his sophomore season. As a general manager, no matter what the sport, but in these terms, of course, basketball, when do you start how far ahead do you look when you're looking at drafts, draft classes, and I guess other teams? Because you had mentioned when you looked at the Supersonics, you had assumed that they wouldn't be good in the future. So how far ahead do you look as a general manager?
Well, things have changed dramatically in that respect. When we talk about the mid 80s, there was occasional early entry players, but for the most part, players, if not playing 4 seasons were playing 3 or maybe sometimes 2, but very rarely did you get 1-year players, one and done, and even less frequently high schoolers. But now, so let's look at that. You get a body of work to evaluate in that context back in the mid 80s that scouts and general managers do not have available to them now. The fact is that we would have most players scouted, potential draftees scouted from their freshman year, all the way through their declaration for the draft or their entrance to the draft after 4 years. That's a lot of data.
Yeah.
And what you do is you see them develop over that time. Now they have to project that. And when you were back in the 80s, the best players were, generally speaking, the 4-year players. Those were the best players available. And they were playing against other seniors and maybe juniors. And they weren't playing, you weren't gauging their abilities against freshmen.
Right.
And those freshmen, for the most part, were not being evaluated against seniors. They were coming up through the pipeline and they were being evaluated in that context. So it's a very, very different set of circumstances now. In some ways it's easier. In a lot of ways, I think it's harder.
Do you think that's why we've seen a lot of players and kind of coming into before we get back into the 80s, but just from a general manager standpoint, do you think that that's why we see a lot of players who do not reach their potential or are overvalued in this day and age?
I think there's a lot more potential for error by working with a really small set of information, very, very limited to a single season, usually. Sometimes, Kyrie Irving, and for everything that you may or may not feel about him, he was evaluated in 10 games, something like that. That's it. He did not play very much at all.
Yeah, you can see their athleticism, you can see their speed, but the sample size I'm sure you're talking about missing is how does he play in adversity? How does he play with this kind of guard? How does he play with this kind of forward? Would he fit in our system? Because has he played with guys that can run the pick and roll? It is much, I'm sure it is more difficult in that respect.
And also in that respect, Red and consequently our scouts were generally would scout players not simply in games, but in practices as well. And Red thought you learned an awful lot about a player by how he practiced. And Allen Iverson would be appalled to hear
that. We love a good Allen Iverson practice reference here on Missing the Point.
I love it. I love it.
So I don't know where Len Bias was as a junior, but I suspect he was better as a senior than he was as a junior. I suspect he was better as a junior than he was as a sophomore. And that's what that is a circumstance we were generally evaluating players.
It's very interesting because we've seen that much more as we've come up. We've seen the high school drafts or draftees, the Kobe Bryants, the Tim Duncans, the LeBron Jameses of the world. And I think a lot of that with that sample size, those are 3 of the greatest players to ever play the game. But to me, a little off topic and making a declaration, I think that the kid should have to go for 3 years and get that sample size and mature, because we've seen too many busts. But I think Dave disagrees with me.
You don't get a lot of LeBron Jameses. He was a grown adult man by the time he was you know what I mean? It's let's just get him in there. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
He had the talent of a 26-year-old when he was 15. So
right, no, that's true. But even in the 70s, 80s, Daryl Dawkins was he was the originator of that, right? Or one of the guys that originated that. Daryl Dawkins was a man. He came out of high school and he's breaking glasses and he's dunking all over the place. So, like I said, it's rare to kind of find that, find that talent. But, it's an inexact science, and you just try to do the best you can with scouting and hope that, you get the best talent possible there. So I want to still stick with the 80s. So now going into the late 80s, so 87, you guys faced Detroit, but obviously coming off being the defending champions. I wanted to ask, did you think that really after in 86, that would be the last time you guys either got to the finals or even won the championship? Like, did you guys think you'd be back many more times, or like, what was your thought process after 86 or even 87?
We thought we were on a roll. We had the team in place that we wanted, and I think we underappreciated where we were. I think we underappreciated how we had gotten there. 4 years of finals in a row is extraordinarily taxing on a team, whether they win or lose.
I mean, physically or emotionally, like
both.
Yeah,
both. Yeah. Both. You don't get. By the time you're logging 4 straight years of playoffs, you're adding. How many games are you adding? You're adding 20-some games. You're adding just that much more. It's all emotional. It's none of there are no easy games. The only thing about playoffs that is better than the regular season is that your opponent plays the same schedule. Other than that, you're playing the best of the best. And so if you get that far, the emotional drain is significant, and the physical drain is as significant. So there were a lot of things that happened in 87. We got to the finals. That was divine intervention with Isaiah's pass to Larry. And was that 88? No, that was
87. Yeah, game 5. Yep.
Yeah, 87. But we were hurt.
Yeah. That's what I wanted. I was like, how hurt was Kevin McHale? Because like I know his foot. Yeah, big hurt. Yeah.
Well,
should he have got surgery?
We got information. Again, you're subject to the vagaries of chance in many ways. You can put yourself in the position, but he got hurt with about a week to go in the season, and frankly, he was having an all MVP style year in 86, 87, and he broke the navicular bone, and which I have not ever experienced, but I'm told by the physicians that we consulted that it was extraordinarily painful. Their advice to Kevin was, and to us, and we sought it together, it was not going to be, if Kevin was going to play because he wanted to play, we might not let him play, but we were never going to force him to play. And what we were told was he was going to need surgery on this injury. The surgery would correct whatever he might do to it, playing on it further. But we don't think he can do that because we don't think he can play with that amount of pain. And Kevin, to his credit, sucked it up and played. And he probably delivered at maybe 50% of capacity, of capability, but he was there and he was trying. Scott Wedman had surgery. People forget how good Scott Wedman was. I don't know if Rayshawn, if you.
Yeah, number 8. No, I remember coming off the bench. Yep, very, very good. Very good player. Sam Vincent, all those guys. Yep. And
one of the things that wasn't recognized generally, but also was good about his game, was he was a very good defender as well. But we lost him. We lost Bill Walton, broke his navicular bone, also in subbing for Kevin in the last week of the season.
Oh my God! What luck!
So we were struggling. We were struggling. And, when you look at the 86 draft the 86 draft, had we signed or had he lived, Len Bias might have been that one extra player we needed in 87.
Yeah, especially at the forward position, because it sounds like, you guys were hurting right at the forward position. Could have come in for crucial minutes.
Yeah, no, he would have made a significant difference. Whether or not it would have been the difference, I don't know. But we were about one player short, and that would be a player. On the other hand, KC was a terrific coach with veteran players, but not as confident putting rookies into positions of importance. So I'm not sure how much we would have gotten had he.
Was Reggie Lewis, was he a rookie by now? He got drafted in 87.
He got drafted in 87, yeah.
Okay, so he wasn't even on the team. Okay. Yeah, because I'm like, yeah, I mean, like I said, it definitely was battles with Detroit. I mean, I know that team was tough, but like you said, if you're battling injuries, there's only so much you can do. Kind of reminds me of what happened with the 2010 Celtics as well. Garnett's coming off injury, Perk gets hurt in the last minute, and it kind of just alters, everything. So
if I'm suddenly forgetting his name, if he had been in shape, I'm trying to think the center. Not
Perkins?
No, not Perkins. Not Perkins.
This is back in the day, or
In that year, that 2010.
oh, Rasheed Wallace probably.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 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 I totally agree.
Rayshawn, you said that back then. I can remember you. Yeah.
Totally agree.
We just couldn't.
He tried to play. No, but he tried to play his way into shape. You know, he signed a nice little deal with us, and obviously in that year, he tried to play his way into shape, and it just didn't work. So I totally agree.
So, Jan, as we have been now talking for a long time and really getting an awesome look inside the Boston Celtics in the 70s and 80s. And, you know, your time with the Celtics in the 90s came to a close towards the end of the 90s in 1997. And, you know, it kind of, as you mentioned with coaches, you know, at some time the time is over for every relationship. And what would you say about your, you know, close to 3 decades with the Boston Celtics?
Well, I think I said earlier that I had the best job in America for me, and I recognize that fairly regularly, openly expressing it to anybody who would listen. By the same token, when I left because Rick Pitino came on board and he cleaned house, and I left that off the Celtics office that day. Frankly, to my surprise, feeling about 3 inches taller. A weight had been lifted from my shoulders. And I hadn't understood that, but I understood it very well. And I frankly took some time off and just recharged, because it takes a lot out of you over time.
Yeah. And you know, you and I talked on the phone last week about how when you were there, the challenges were very different. You know, you and I have talked about your run-ins with the media, the Dan Shaughnessy's, the Bob Ryans, the Jackie McMullins of the world.
I think in fairness, we got to put Dan in one group, Jackie in another group, and I'll leave it to you to decide which you like better. So
sure.
And Dan knows as I said to you when we talked a week ago, Joe, I could be friends with Dan. I like Dan. I just don't want to be business colleagues with Dan. He just has a different mindset, different goals. And
well, you're not the only general manager of a Boston sports team to have ever said that, because Danny might say the same, but you know, and that's kind of where I was going with that, is that Danny has to deal with, and we're not going to talk about Danny, but just general managers now in general deal with so many different challenges. And you had your own back then. Sometimes yours was that, and you told me a story last week where it was kind of, you were getting information secondhand, where now everyone gets information firsthand, and sometimes it's completely false and incorrect information. It's just a different way of getting it there, and that takes a toll. And you know, that happened with the Celtics this week, where there was rumors about a player, and then, you know, Brad Stevens comes out and says, "Oh, that was on Twitter." Well, you guys had me in Indiana a week ago. So just as we close out, you know, what were the challenges as a general manager, or even as a player, with the media back then? Were they similar to today?
I don't think so. I can't tell you that I have a good enough grasp of what goes on from a team's perspective, but I think you'd agree that my goal was to make sure that every media member had my home phone number. I don't particularly want to hear from them, but I do want to hear from them if they're running with something and they're not sure, to check it out, because it was always better for everybody that we correct those kind of errors before they become public, because they become very difficult to deal with often when they're out there floating in the air, and they get and they get a life of their own.
I would imagine it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get out ahead of stories in the same way now as it was then.
I agree. I can't. As I said, I can't really appreciate how difficult it is. I know it's difficult. I know it's different than what we had. Very, very infrequently were things released either through TV or through newspaper articles that we hadn't had an opportunity to discuss with the author. And we had a pretty good relationship with people. I felt several things. That first, and different than Red and different than Dave Gavitt, both who kept pretty much arm's length from the media. My view was that, I don't know how it flies now, but that the people in the media were hired by media outlets to report on the team. As a consequence, they have to write something every day. They've got to work every single day. And if you don't help them, you don't recognize that they have to do that, you're going to find yourself in adversarial circumstances where you don't help them, and they're going to have to figure something out on their own. And you may not like what they do. And so I was very conscious of that kind of interaction with media folks, and I think it worked. I think it worked well. But we didn't have a perfect world then either. There were things that came out that were just wrong.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I want to respectfully say this. I have to say you dodged the bullet by not being a part of the Rick Pitino era. I'll just leave it at that. We won't go any further. Like I said, you can have your own thoughts about that, but I'll just say respectfully, I'm glad that you didn't have to go through the Rick Pitino era. We had to go through it as fans, even being young kids, but it was bad. But the final question I have for you, Jan, is, so obviously, 96, I think that was the final draft that you had before, leaving the GM role. And that was one of the deeper draft classes really of all time. So people talk about 84, people talk about 96, and they talk about 2003. So 96, pretty top heavy. AI goes first, Ray Allen goes fourth, Stephon Marbury, and then Celtics at 6 pick Antoine Walker. But
didn't Ray go fifth?
Yeah, Ray went fifth, but again, he got swapped for Stephon Marbury, and then some guy named Kobe Bryant dropped down to 13th. Got drafted by Charlotte. So I know that he did work out for the Celtics, but so in hindsight, were you impressed with his workout? And was it a strong consideration to draft Kobe Bryant at number 6?
Yes and yes, but no. He was. We didn't take a chance on him, and we should have. Obviously, when we say take a chance on him, he was a high school kid, and we had not had a lot of experience with high school kids. What we had was we had Antoine Walker sitting there. And now, he was only finishing his sophomore year, so he was only a couple of years wiser, if you will. But no, we benefited in having the opportunity to draft Larry Bird because teams ahead of us didn't have confidence enough in what they had to wait for Larry and for a year. And we, unfortunately, did the same thing with respect to Kobe. And I regret that.
Larry Bird is your Kobe Bryant.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean,
it's asking a lot to get 2 of those,
right? But it's one of the few situations where it's very okay to go 1 out of 2. Very okay to go 1 out of 2. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. Thank God it wasn't Kerry Kittles.
He was outstanding in his workout. He was outstanding. There was no surprise there. I in retrospect can't give you a good answer that I feel comfortable with. Mm-hmm. He was also, which would come as no surprise with looking back in retrospect, he was so articulate, so well. He knew who he was. He knew what he needed to do, and he was really he was impressive at every juncture, every point. And we didn't take him.
Hey, it was good for the rivalry, though. It's like then 08 happens, and then and then we see him in the finals. We beat him in the finals. I mean, I like how it worked out. And I loved Antoine Walker, by the way. So.
Yeah, I did too. But it's just like that's just something that had to be asked. Obviously, I was thinking about that. So I mean, Antoine played 14 years, so it's not like he was out the league in 3 or 4 years. Like he was still a very successful pick. Obviously, I know you guys didn't draft this next guy, but obviously his Kentucky teammate Walter McCarty gets drafted 20th by New York, and then he ends up coming over in there. So yeah, I mean, we had a good run with some Kentucky guys, and some guy named Paul Pierce gets drafted a couple years later. So we did all right.
Well, I was on the other side of that in Denver, and we elected to pass on
Pierce.
Paul.
Yeah, you got Ray LaFrance instead, right?
Take his teammate. Yeah,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think. Yeah, hindsight's always a wonderful thing. But in looking at Rafe, he got hurt, and he really ruined his knee. And it took a while to figure out that he just could not play anymore.
Yeah, there's no way to predict that kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's like an injury like that, it's like you can't draft based on maybe his knee will get hurt.
Yeah. No, of course not. Of course not. And that's what we did. That's what I was working with Dan Issel at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, Denver Nuggets legend. Yeah, ABA guy. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So.
I just have one last question. Just as somebody who kind of lived through and was working in these different eras of basketball, I think a lot these days about kind of where we are now with basketball, the kind of player empowerment era. I think there's positives to it. I think there's definitely downsides and negatives to it. Throughout this show, you've been talking about the 70s Celtics, great heart, 69, a team that had to, grit and grind for everything they got. The 80s comeback wins, that character that those Celtics teams had. And, there was teams like that you can name in the 90s, the Bulls, they had teams like that. The Knicks had teams like that. In this era, do you see a difference in players, in their attitudes, in like how they play? Do you think that the same kind of winner exists as it used to, or do you think maybe it's just how we interact with the league, or do you think that kind of grind and heart that you saw in your Celtics teams, are we going to see that again? Is another team like that going to come along ever again?
It's tough to say, because I look back on those teams that we talked about, and they were me.
Right.
They weren't. I mean, clearly they were their own men, but we were together in this. And so I understand that. I don't understand necessarily that in another context where I don't have that insight. So anytime, look, you have a team that has Dave Cowens on it, or you have a team that has Marcus Smart on it, they are going to be different than those very same teams and group of players if they're not there. And those two are good examples of it. And when one of the things that happens when you have players like that, there's a loose ball, the first thing the other team does is what?
Look to see where Cowens was. Yeah.
Where is Dave Cowens?
Yeah, where's Marcus Smart?
Marcus
Right.
Smart
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
And more so, I have more familiarity with Dave. With Dave Cowens than I do with Marcus Smart. I watch from afar, but the issue is simply this: a loose ball, he's going for it, no matter what. Now he may get the ball, he may get possession, but he may also break your leg in the process. He doesn't care. And while you're processing all of that, he gets the loose ball, and that's a trait, and that's an asset that hopefully isn't offset by other things that can happen, where emotions take precedence. And so it's a tough thing to for these players to be able to get the most out of it without having a downside aspect to it as well. I think they play just as hard. I think there are different things that happen. I think their travel is easier. A lot of things are easier. A lot of things are harder. And I look ridiculously. I look at players making I don't know, $6, $7, $8 million, and I feel bad for them. What happened? What was their agent thinking of? Now, it's a different world. So very different world.
Coming from a GM, that's kind of big. What happened? Because you're the guy that would want to offer them less than that, right?
Well, sure, but I'm just looking at what the scale is now. That's
right, exactly right.
It's just a different world.
Larry Bird would have got 250 right now, easily. No, I said Larry Bird would have got about 250 right now. I feel like 250 mil easily, 5 years, max deal.
So last questions from me, Jen. Who, if you're at liberty to say or wish to say, who would you say is your best draft pick, and who was your best free agent signing?
Well, let's start and clarify one thing. None of this was me. All of this was us, and us starts with Red Auerbach. Now, when we came back from winning in '86, and we had the draft approaching. We had won on a Sunday, and the draft was 10 days later. And we convened and got together all the scouts during that week and did a whole bunch of evaluations that were just continuations of what we had been doing with respect to evaluating the potential players in the draft. I got a request from Channel 4, Bob Lobel, to come and do a live shot from my office at that time, which was on 150 Causeway Street. And Bob came with his crew, and he starts by, you guys have spent, you guys won the championship a week ago. You've spent all this energy on getting everything you could out of this team, and we're all proud of you. But the draft is coming up. Are you going to be ready for the draft? And I said, Bob, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can multitask, but we've been doing this for a long time. What we're going to do is we spent the week reevaluating, and we're told everybody to go home. Take the weekend off. You want to watch more film, you can come in, but we're not going to plan to meet until Monday. The draft is Tuesday. And I said, what we plan to do is get together on Monday, sit down, go over everything, reach a consensus, and that's the guy we'll draft. I had an epiphany. I'm thinking to myself, who the heck am I kidding? So I said, unless, of course, Red Auerbach wants to draft somebody else, in which case, that's the guy we'll draft. And, that was the reality of it. The reality of it, this was Red's show. It was always Red's show. And we provided lots of support. And I think we did a really good job in all of it. And Red was tough on scouts, on making certain they could defend their views. So he could be persuaded, but Red was a force too. So he as far as free agents are concerned, we didn't do a lot of free agent signings, as you may have noticed. I mean, Xavier McDaniel comes to mind, but he didn't play long. But I'm at a loss to tell you who.
Well, Jan Volk, we could sit here for hours and have you just tell us countless stories about your time with the Boston Celtics and the NBA during the time you were there. So we're going to have you back on to do that. But looking at your tenure with the Boston Celtics in any capacity, in the time you were there, the team only missed the playoffs 4 times. So you may have been a good luck charm. I know it was us, but you may have at least been a good luck charm.
Let me tell you one thing apropos of that. I had a number of basketballs in my office, but I had one particular ball was sitting on a hand like it was being shot, and it had 2 prominent signatures on it. I hate to demean people, but the two signatures were Sidney Wicks and Curtis Rowe, and those were the signatures that were most prominent that I could see. And I would look there periodically whenever I felt like things weren't going so well and realize they could always be worse. And that was a reminder for me.
Well, that's a good way to end. So Jan Volk, former general manager of the Boston Celtics and a man who wore many hats with that organization, and now, as we've heard, famously summoned by the great Red Auerbach into the Boston Celtics locker room to execute a trade. But Jan, I know personally you don't have much in the way of social media, but where can people find you, and what are you up to?
I hope they don't find me. No, I'm as you know, I'm very active in local college sports with the photography for schools, for colleges, and that's a job that I enjoy, but it's time consuming. And it's regular. It keeps me busy. So they're probably not going to find me. Maybe you might see me, at a college sporting event. But
we always do. You always show up somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, Jan, go ahead.
No, that was right.
Well, Jan Volk, thank you very much for joining us here on Missing the Point. For Rayshawn Buchanan, Dave Clarke, and Craig D'Alessandro, we thank you for listening to our interview here with former general manager of the Boston Celtics, Jan Volk. We'll talk to you next time.
Step inside the marketing mirror to uncover marketing secrets, discover gems, tactics, lessons, and campaigns you can use, next gen or fundamentals. Grab the marketing magic to improve your marketing and win more business.
Electricast. Electricast.
Welcome to Tuning Into Sound Wellbeing, where we harmonise your mind, body and soul. I'm Amanda, your sound therapy expert.
And I'm Stephen, the curious explorer uncovering the mysteries of sound.
Together we explore vibrations, frequencies and the power of sound therapy and tuning forks.
Discover ancient wisdom, reduce stress and tune into a healthier life. Subscribe to Tuning Into Sound Wellbeing today.
Electricast.